Hi. This is Novel Admire. Welcome to my channel. Have fun. The Father of Superheroes. Chapter 1, Ding Dong, Found a Superman. Boom. A gunshot rang out, and the orange shell fell to the ground and rolled into a pool of blood on the ground. Mike glanced at the corpse, strode over and turned away. Mission completed. He got rid of the organization. At least that's their agreement. After leaving the mission target's apartment, Mike drove away. After walking around the street twice and making sure that no one was following him, he drove to a baby product store, bought some milk powder, diapers, clothes and some baby products such as toys, and left New York. To a small town dozens of kilometers away, I drove more than 10 minutes to a farm on the edge of the town. Kent Farm. This is his home. No one in the Assassin League organization knows. Since he came to this world from another Earth more than 5 years ago, inheriting the farm from his deceased parents, he has been here only a handful of times. For several of years, the farm has been looked after by an elderly couple, and 3 months ago, after the elderly couple was picked up by their children, the farm returned to him. He originally wanted to sell it, but after the farm was handed over to him, something happened 2 months ago that completely changed his mind. 2 months ago, when he came to the house to deal with the farm affairs, he planned to tidy up the things and sold them all that night. Boom. With the violent tremor of the ground, his family's farm was smashed into a deep pit by an uninvited guest. What the hell? Mike, who was sleeping, got up, put on his pants, put on a casual dress, picked up the weapon placed by the pillow, and strode out. When he ran to the cornfield not far from his home, he saw that the original neat crops had been smashed down, and in the center of the impact, there was a deep pit, and in the deep pit, there was a small spaceship. Looking at the spaceship, he suddenly widened his eyes. In this world, after he knew that there was Captain America, he felt that he would not be surprised by what happened in this world, but when he saw a spaceship smashed into his home, his heart was still full of absurdity. The spaceship is small, but full of technology. What's the situation? Mike walked over cautiously. And when he approached the spaceship turned on automatically, and then revealed the baby inside. Wait, baby? Looking at the sleeping baby, Mike was stunned, and he didn't come back to his senses until the baby cried out with a wow. Where do you seem to have seen this scene? A thought flashed in his mind, and he quickly walked to the baby and took the baby out of the spaceship. The baby is naked, it's a boy. There was nothing to prove his identity on his body, and at this moment, something like a key bounced out of the spaceship and floated in front of him. He reached out and grabbed it, looked at it, and narrowed his eyes. An S logo is on top of the key, and this logo. Krypton? Superman? He whispered and looked at the child in his arms, full of disbelief. Is this the future Superman? So what role does he play? Wow. The child seemed to sense something and cried loudly. All the doubts in his mind were temporarily suppressed, and he hurriedly took off his clothes and wrapped the baby. Feeling the warmth, the baby's cry stopped, and the silver moonlight shone on the baby. The baby opened a pair of blue eyes as pure as the sky, looked at Mike, and smiled at him. In an instant, Mike felt as if he had been hit by an electric current, and his heart contracted violently. He remembered the first time he hugged his son before he crossed here. The two overlap at this moment, and the longing and sadness that have been buried in the bottom of my heart emerge, and then a kind of moving of life flows out of my heart. After a few seconds of silence, he stretched out his hand to tease the little guy in his arms, and said gently but firmly, "In the future, please give me more advice, little guy." The voice fell, and when he turned around, an indifferent voice that he had long forgotten rang out. The Father of Heroes system was successfully activated, and the host's unique ability was activated. What? Mike thought he heard it wrong, but the next second a system came to his mind. The Father of Heroes system. What kind of ghost name is this? What kind of ghost system is this? The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and he checked the system as he walked home. Host, Mike Kent. Newbie gift, Assassin time. Ability, Memory Fantasy materializes. Current ability level, LV1. Current upgrade progress, 0%. Memory Fantasy materialized? What is this ability? Mike was a little puzzled, then continued to look down. Below his profile, there is a name. Son, Clark Kent, Kryptonian. So, is this kid really Superman? Doesn't he even need a name? Looking at the system, Mike now finally determined the identity of the baby in his arms. In addition, there is no information or introduction under Clark's name. And many more. The system has Clark's name, so, Clark's appearance is related to the system? It's not because of the system that Clark appeared in front of me, right? Otherwise, it is impossible to explain why the system was activated after he decided to adopt Clark. You know, this system has been silent since the novice gift package was sent to him to get the assassin ability in the Assassin League, so long that he himself forgot the existence of the system. The name of the system, plus Clark sent to him, Mike was unable to hold his forehead. What is this system? It seems that he has the ability and can be upgraded, but how to upgrade? Is there a manual? Unable to spit out, Mike looked at Clark in his arms, saw the little guy closed his eyes again, and slept peacefully, and couldn't help showing a smile. Innocent, pure, beautiful. So, from that moment on, he decided to leave the organization, and he spent the next 2 months fighting for it. On this evening, he finally completed the last task that the organization gave him. According to the agreement, he and the organization were cleared. With a silent recitation in his heart, he parked the car and opened the door. It was late, but he noticed that the lights in Clark's room were still on. Maybe Clark is still awake? He walked slowly towards Clark's room. For the past 2 months, he had to hire a nanny to take care of the children because of his tasks and the relationship with the organization. During this period, he had several phone calls with a nanny. The nanny said that Clark was very obedient and seldom cried. He also came back once in the middle. Seeing that Clark was in good spirits, he felt relieved. Standing at the door, Mike gently pushed open the door. The table lamp emits a soft glow, and a fat middle-aged woman is sitting in front of the window with Clark in her arms, teasing the little guy with her fingers. Mike's originally soft face suddenly turned cold, and he said coldly, "How did you find this place?" Sir? What did you say? Why are you back at this time?" The middle-aged woman raised her face, confused. Mike pressed his hand to his waist and said, "You know, I won't miss this distance, Ruiwan." Chapter 2? Trade. We. Along with laughter, the appearance of the middle-aged woman in front of Mike instantly changed. The skin on her body is like a layer of waves, and in an instant, the middle-aged woman has turned into a weird person with blue skin. Although she has a curvy figure, her body is blue all over, and she even has dark blue scales on key parts of her body, and her red hair makes her a bit more bewitching and chilling. Mystique, Ruiwan. There are mutants in this world, but what makes Mike strange is that he has not heard the names of the 2 pillars of mutants, Professor X and Magneto. Mystical girl Ruiwan looked at Mike, her mouth curled slightly, and asked curiously, "How did you recognize me?" Mike said, "You are holding the child in the wrong position. A woman who has given birth to 3 children can never be wrong in holding the child." Ruiwan was stunned and nodded. Seeing that Mike had been looking at her coldly, he suddenly smiled and said, "What? I'm not used to seeing me like this? So what?" With that said, the blue skin on her body faded and she became a blonde woman. The figure is still hot, but what is interesting is that under the charming temperament, the delicate facial features are pure. This is how she was. Mike was expressionless, and Ruiwan, who was wearing a casual suit, hugged Clark and walked to Mike's side. Mike's eyes jumped and he said, "How did you find this place? Is it not easy for me to follow you?" Ruiwan said lightly, reached out and stroked Mike's face lightly, and said playfully, "I'm still so shy, I like you the most." After a while, he suddenly said, "Is it worth it for this child?" Without any hesitation, Mike nodded affirmatively and said, "It's worth it." This is something he made a decision 2 months ago. It's worth it? Ruiwan shoved Clark into Mike's arms, and Mike hugged him in a hurry, relieved when he saw that the little guy was not frightened. Seeing this, Ruiwan's eyes became even more angered, and said, "You think that you will clear the two after you say and organize?" Mike smiled slightly and said, "Let's talk about it first. Why are you here?" Ruiwan said angrily, "I said I'm looking for you to have a baby for you, do you believe it?" Seeing Clark being protected by Mike in his arms, Ruiwan felt a little jealous. If only her parents protected her like this when she was a child. Mike looked at Ruiwan with a look of believing in you, which made Ruiwan unhappy for a while. Walking to the side of the chair and sitting down, Ruiwan folded her slender legs together and said, "Sloan asked me to come to you. He knows this? He knows about the child?" Mike frowned. Ruiwan shook her head and said, "I don't know, I didn't tell anyone. She found it here, and she heard Mike's call by chance. When Mike came back last time, she came back and found it out of curiosity." Mike looked at Ruiwan and said seriously, "Thank you." Ruiwan waved her hand and said, "It's a repayment of the favor you saved me before." Mike hugged Clark, let it lean on him, and patted Clark on the back lightly. The little guy yawned and slowly closed his eyes. Seeing Mike's actions, Ruiwan was speechless. Who would have imagined that this man who kills without blinking and is known as the king of assassins coaxes a child to sleep so gently? U.S.H. Mike made a gesture, walked to the crib, put Clark, who was already asleep, on the bed gently, covered it with a small quilt, pointed to the outside, and walked out first. Raven got up, suddenly grimaced at Clark, and walked out. Following Mike downstairs, Ruiwan sat on the sofa. After Mike got a glass of water for her, she looked at Mike with her chin up, as if she knew Mike for the first time. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "I'm thinking, which woman stole your soul and gave you a child?" "I picked up the child." "Pick it up?" Ruiwan exclaimed, then muttered, "You're crazy. For a picked baby, facing the situation of being killed by the organization, is this not crazy?" "Ha ha." With an indifferent smile, Mike said, "What did Sloan ask you to do with me?" What does he want to do? Sloan, an ambitious guy. The corners of Ruiwan's mouth twitched, and she said, "You still read it thoroughly, why is it just for?" "Don't talk about the child, I have already decided." Mike held up the water glass, and the white mist slowly rose in front of his eyes, blocking his face. He said calmly, "Suddenly tired of this kind of life." Ruiwan was silent for a while, and said, "Stone wants to make a deal with you." "Deal?" Mike put down the cup in his hand and said solemnly, "He wants me to kill Kutcher on the condition that I exit safely. Kutcher is the leader of the Assassin League now. As long as he is killed, Stone can take the leader's position." Raven nodded. Mike looked calm. "Do you think I can trust him?" "Half-half, at least he won't let you go like Kutcher." Mike closed his eyes and thought for a few seconds, then nodded and said to Ruiwan, "After killing Kutcher, I want you to do me a favor." Ruiwan was stunned and smiled playfully, "Why should I help you? I owe you a favor." "It is good." Ruiwan agreed neatly. "Mike's favor is still very useful. Also, I want to see Sloan." "What time?" "Tomorrow. I'll make arrangements." Afterwards, the two chatted for a while, and Ruiwan turned around and left. As for Clark's nanny, Ruiwan became Mike's image, and let her go home first tonight. In other words, it's up to Mike to take care of Clark tonight. Wow, wow. Clark's cry came from upstairs, Mike's eyes shrank, his heart beat violently, and the whole person rushed upstairs at a very fast speed and came to Clark. At this time, there are generally only two reasons for babies crying: one is hungry, and the other is to solve physiological needs. Mike, who was a father in his last life, still understands some of these things. "Don't panic." Mike looked at it, and Clark was very angry and didn't pull it. While he comforted Clark, he rushed up the milk powder. After waiting for a few minutes, after the milk powder was at a comfortable temperature, while feeding Clark, his mind couldn't help but think of other things. Sloan wants to control the Assassin League, and Kutcher is the biggest obstacle, because Kutcher is not only the leader, but also the only Assassin King in the Assassin League. The only one who can deal with the King of Assassins is the King of Assassins. That's why he asked Raven to find Mike. Kutcher, as the leader of the Assassin League, has an acquaintance with Mike, so Mike knows him well. This person will never let someone who is a threat to the organization just leave the organization. The agreement is an agreement, and Kutcher will not break his promise. He allows Mike to leave the organization safely, but after leaving, Mike is no longer a member of the organization, and his dealing with Mike is not a violation of the agreement. Once you enter the rivers and lakes, you can't help yourself. Mike's eyes were gloomy, but when he looked down and looked at Clark curiously while feeding, the gloom in his eyes disappeared instantly, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. But the next second, the smile on his face froze. This kid pulled. Chapter 3, Garbage Capability. Busy night. It was not until the next morning when the nanny knocked on the door, the tired Mike was relieved. Damn Ruiwen, why did you let the nanny go back yesterday? Mike sighed inwardly. Mr. Kent. The fat middle-aged nanny Norma hugged Clark. Seeing Mike's tired face, he sighed, it's really hard for you to take care of the child by yourself. Mike rubbed his forehead and said, fortunately, I'm getting used to it. Norma smiled, hugged Clark close to Mike, and whispered, the job of raising children still has to be handed over to a woman. You can't have a woman in your family. Hearing this, Mike was alert. What does Norma want to do? Wouldn't you like to recommend yourself? Quickly glanced at the other's fat body, Mike shuddered, and hurriedly said, it's okay, I'm used to it. You can't get used to it. Norma looked sad, thinking about Mike. I know a beautiful girl, she is pregnant, she wants to find someone to marry. I think you are very suitable, after all, you also have a child. Rich, handsome, and a farm. If she was 20 years younger, she wouldn't give it to others. Mike's face darkened. Huh, I'm just like a pickup man? So his face became tense, and he said, no need. He picked up his clothes, walked downstairs, and said at the same time, I have something to deal with, take care of Clark. Norma looked in Mike's back with a pity. She still thinks that Mike and her daughter are quite suitable, and she will find a chance to talk about it. If it doesn't work, she can only send her daughter to the hospital. Mike drove to New York, driving on the streets, feeling the breath of the 1980s, and sighed. In this day and age, there is a lot less to do to pass the time. However, as far as this world is concerned, it is much more dangerous than the world before him. Super tech, alien invasion, magical dimension invasion, mutants, superheroes and criminals. Just thinking about what happened in the future gave Mike a headache. However, none of these matters had anything to do with him. When he was done with these matters, he would concentrate on going home and taking the children. It's good not to fight and kill. Thinking of his leisurely life after retirement, the corners of Mike's mouth twitched slightly. New York, a coffee shop. As long as you help me kill him, and you don't reveal any secrets of the organization, I will never let anyone trouble you. This is my promise. The dark-faced Sloan smiled at Mike and added, I have more credit than Kutcher. Mike said lightly, deal. Sloan was slightly taken aback. He thought he would spend more time talking, but he didn't expect Mike to agree. However, after he saw Mike's gaze, his heart froze. If he dares to break his word, kill him. He read such a message from Mike's eyes. Naked and undisguised. Ha! He chuckled in a low voice and said, my plan is this, he is on Wednesday. Stop. Mike raised his hand and said, I don't want to hear your long and interlocking delicate plan. In my opinion, the more planning links, the easier it is to make mistakes. As long as there is a little mistake, the plan is over. After knocking on the table, Mike said, tell me the time, place and number of people. Sloan was stunned, and then smiled, you are still as confident as ever. Mike got up and said, give me the information tonight, this is my phone number. With a flick of his finger, A card with a phone number fell on the table, and Mike quickly left. Sloan picked up the card, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Male Infertility Hospital, Dr. Lucci. He turned the card over, looked at the handwritten phone number on the back, breathed a sigh of relief, put it close to his body, put a piece of money under the coffee cup, and turned away. Mike's house, more precisely, is the hiding place. Pushing open the door of the apartment, Mike looked at Ruiwen, who was reclining on the sofa, and said, "Are you here?" Ruiwen was stunned for a while, not seeing Mike's unexpected expression. She felt depressed for a while, and couldn't help but said, "Why are you not surprised at all? This is the third place you discovered, how can I get up unexpectedly?" Giggle. Ruiwen covered her mouth and laughed, and said, "Do you have any other safe houses?" Mike said lightly, "Who knows?" Ruiwen said sternly, "How did you and Sloan talk? You care so much about this?" Ruiwen said sincerely, "Because it has something to do with you." Mike sneered hot and said, "This is not funny at all. It's boring." Ruiwen lazily lay back on the sofa. Suddenly, Mike said, "You cooperated with Sloan to rescue the leader of the Hellfire Club who was arrested 2 years ago?" Ruiwen sat up abruptly, her tone uncontrollably cold, and said, "You want to stop me? Mutant. Since the Hellfire Club has been doing things all over the world and wants to use force to seek survival space for mutants, most ordinary people in the world are full of disgust towards the mutant group. 2 years ago, after the leader of Hellfire was captured by SHIELD, Hellfire's actions became low-key, and Ruiwen was the assassin league that he joined 2 years ago. Except for Mike, who accidentally discovered Ruiwen's mutant identity during an operation, no one else in the Assassin League knew about it. Now, Sloan may know, but it's only maybe. Am I free?" Ruiwen stared at Mike for a few seconds, lay down again, his fingers lightly hooked his long blonde hair, and his tone couldn't help but relax. "You are really busy, you still have a child to take care of. If you're just here to make sure that Sloan and I have come to an agreement, you can go now." "Hey, it's so ruthless. I also want to ask you, what did you mean by helping yesterday? You'll know when you kill Kutcher." Ruiwen got up, smiled at Mike Uniang, changed her appearance casually, turned and left. She seemed to owe Mike another favor. After watching Ruiwen leave, Mike sat on the sofa, a thought moved, and a dagger appeared in his hand out of thin air. Throwing daggers up and down, Mike's face was calm. After 2 months of exploration, he finally understood the following points about his abilities. 1. The realization of memory fantasy is to materialize the things in his memory. Of course, this thing can be reset and changed to a certain extent by him. The degree of change is very low. 2. This memory refers to the memory before and after the traversal, which he cannot manifest. 3. There is a time limit for what can be manifested, but after all, it is only at the level of LV1. After that, who knows, he has not even figured out the way to upgrade his abilities. 4. It takes time to manifest each time. The more familiar and simple it is, the less time it takes. Now, after his Praktos, the most familiar manifested item is a dagger. 5. So far, Mike has not been able to implement modern weapons. I don't know if this is due to the limitation of the system or because the level is too low. Finally came to a conclusion. Trash ability. Chapter 4? Card. Mike couldn't help but scolded, and with a flick of his hand, the dagger in his hand flew out with a swish, pinning a buzzing fly to the wall. The rectangular pattern on the wall had a dagger inserted in the middle. Scanning the patterns and daggers on the wall, a flash of light flashed in Mike's mind. Rectangle. Dagger. It takes time for his ability to materialize. He needs to think about the objects he materializes in his mind first, and the process of thinking takes time. Simple is better, complex items, who gives him time in battle? If he omits this thought process. No, it should not be said to be omitted, because it cannot be omitted at all. To be precise, prepare in advance and complete the process of thinking in advance. Mike pinched his chin, thoughts flashed through his mind. The memory fantasy materializes what he remembers. The things in his memory are more than ordinary daggers. About this, he has already tried. Yes, he had successfully embodied a Zanpakuto before, a real Zanpakuto that he could use. It's just that he spent 4 hours in order to realize the knife, but it could only last for 30 seconds. During the battle, who gave him 4 hours to materialize? Therefore, even if he can manifest powerful items, this ability is also called garbage by him. But now, if his idea just now works out, his heart could not help beating violently. Taking a deep breath, Mike calmed himself down quickly. After a while, he closed his eyes and began to conceive. He needs a medium that can store manifested items so that he can use manifested items at any time, and this medium is a card, which can store items and even cards such as abilities. This is what he just thought of. First materialize the card as a medium, and then store the items that need to be materialized in the card. When using it, directly activate it with the power of materialization, so that the process of thinking can be advanced to before the battle. You can eliminate the disadvantages of this ability. 2 hours later. After he referred to Yu-Gi-Oh!, Hearthstone, etc., the cards in this type of card game, and then the blank cards that he reset and transformed appeared in his hand. After his settings, the cards were given some characteristics by him when they were embodied. 1. It can store materialized things. 2. After carrying the embodied things, it can be stored in the mind for a long time for him to use at any time. 3. After carrying the embodied thing, when it is embodied again by him, it can be saved for a day. Looking at the blank card in his palm, Mike couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. But immediately he calmed down. Now is not the time to be happy, this is only half the battle. The next step is to carry the materialized things. Holding the card between his fingers, Mike calmly used his abilities. The next second, a dagger that he was most familiar with appeared on the card. Daggers come to life. On the back of the card, the information of the materialized thing is written. Item name, dagger. Item description, none. Note, just a normal dagger, nothing special, but it might cut your throat. This information was added by Mike because he was afraid that there would be too many cards in the future, for the convenience of future use. With a thought, the card disappeared, and a dagger appeared in his hand. It worked. Mike was surprised. In this way, he has solved the drawbacks of his own abilities. This ability. It's delicious. Next, he materialized a blank card and started materializing things. This time, he chose a powerful weapon. The realization time will be somewhat long, and the process cannot be interrupted. But, just when he was halfway through, a phone call came. Looking at the phone, it's Sloan. He brought news of Kutcher. After a while, after getting the information he wanted, Mike sighed. If a weapon was embodied, this operation would be much easier, but there was no time. After thinking for a while, he made a phone call, put 2 pistols in the holsters around his waist, put on a coat, carried a suitcase, left the safe house, and drove into the night. Manhattan at night. This is a high-end apartment building. In an apartment, a man and a woman were fighting hotly in the room. They went from the kitchen table, to the sofa in the living room, all the way to the bedroom, and entered the climax of the battle. On the roof of the building 100 meters away, Mike held a sniper rifle and looked through the bedroom window, watching the two fighting together and pouted. Pulled the trigger. Boom. The bullet shattered the window and hit the man's head. His head exploded like a tomato, spilling all over the bedroom, instantly pouring the woman under Kutcher into a tomato chicken. The woman screamed and fainted. Mike was stunned. He didn't expect Kutcher to be killed so easily. At this moment, a rapid voice sounded in his ear through the earphone of the walkie-talkie. Get out of the way. At the same time as hearing the sound, Mike did not hesitate, and hurriedly rolled to the side. Boom. Gravel splashes. A bullet hit where he had just been, leaving a cracked crater on the concrete fence of the balcony. Mike's eyes shrank, turned amber in an instant, and cold sweat came out of his forehead. If she is 1 second late, she will be headshot. This is Kutcher's trap. I dare not promise Mike to become him to help. Ruiwen hid behind the bunker, bit her lip, and whispered, "Mike. Find him." At this moment, Mike's voice sounded again. "Hurry up." Ruiwen didn't hesitate, and drilled her legs to the side. Boom. A bullet passed through the cover, leaving a hole in the spot where he had just been hiding. Ruiwen sucked in a breath, pressed her earphones and shouted, "Damn it. Mike. Hurry up and find him." She didn't want to become a corpse just because of her help. As soon as the voice fell, there was a gunshot in the earphone. Mike shot. He has found Kutcher's location. Ruiwen breathed a sigh of relief. Under the attack of a king of assassins, even if Kuki was also the king of assassins, he would never dare to attack her distractedly. She is safe for now. Get out of there. Mike said lightly, and the sniper rifle in his hand made a loud noise. There was no need to aim at all, and a shot was suppressed to Kuki. Now, light and dark have turned, and the danger is Kutcher. Mike's eyes were calm, but his eyes were chasing a fast-moving figure, his fingers constantly pulling the trigger. Suddenly, Mike left the place without any warning. Boom. The gravel splashed, and 2 craters appeared. Chapter 5, Bullet Exchange. It's another killer. Kutcher also ambushed people. Mike took a deep breath, his eyes were calm even if the bullet rubbed his body and flew past. The heart beat violently, the blood began to flow rapidly in the body, everything in his world began to slow down, and even the flying bullets were clearly seen by him. Then, he saw the ballistic trajectory of the bullet flying, and saw the direction in which the bullet was shot. The next second, he quickly left the place, and the sniper rifle in his arms rang when his body moved quickly. Boom. With the sound of gunfire, a killer's head burst open in an instant. At the same time, Ruiwen, who had been watching the battle, also fired a bullet at another killer, bursting the opponent's head. The gunshots stopped, and Mike's eyes sank. Kutcher would never let go of this moment of counterattack, but the opponent didn't attack. If I were him, after confirming that I was the one who fired the first shot, under the condition that he couldn't kill it from a long distance. Suddenly, his face changed. "Ruiwen. Be careful. Kuki may have gone to your side." Ruiwen was startled, threw away the gun in her hand, and ran downstairs quickly, but after a few seconds, the screaming sounded. "He came. Wait for me." Hearing the sound of gunfire, Mike let out a low voice, glanced at the building where Ruiwen was located, and quickly ran to the other side of the roof. In his perception, everything started to slow down, and then he ran at the fastest speed. When he reached the edge of the building, he snorted lightly and rushed out. The body crossed over the street and landed on the roof of the opposite building. The body rolled on the ground. After removing the impact, he jumped up from the ground and continued to run forward. Ruiwen was 3 streets away from him, which was the fastest way to get there. 1, 2, 3. When Mike jumped for the 3rd time, his body adjusted its position in midair. After his body rushed straight out of more than 10 meters in midair, he began to fall. Then, as he kept approaching the opposite building, he crossed his hands in front of him and bumped into the air. A glass shattered and fell into the building. "Ah!" 2 exclamations sounded. A man and woman who were having sex, were disturbed by an uninvited guest, and shivered and hugged each other. Mike glanced at the 2 of them. Nice. Sorry." You guys continue. After speaking in a low voice, Mike rushed out the door. "This is the 10th floor, and the top floor is the 17th floor. Ruiwen was on the top floor before, but now. Ruiwen, are you there?" Accompanied by the rapid breathing, Ruiwen's tone was full of anxiety and fear. "5th floor, I'm running down." Mike turned around and ran downstairs. Ruiwen's choice was correct. As long as she ran into the street and changed her appearance, Kutcher would lose her target. But the premise of all this is that she can run out of the building. Ruiwen is like a nimble cat, with the appearance of Mike, but making various soft movements, striding along the stairs, pressing her hand on the railing, and jumping to the next floor. She's fast, but Kutcher isn't slow either. With a forceful step on the steps, the whole figure was shot out like an arrow, and it only took 2 steps to reach the next floor. While chasing, the gun in his hand fired a bullet from time to time. He looked in Mike's back and felt a little strange in his heart. That's Mike, yes, but why hasn't he fought back, but has been running away? Could it be that there is a trap down there? Mike, you can't escape. Kutcher roared, jumped up, stepped on the wall opposite the stairs, turned and jumped down in midair, flying over a dozen steps, looking at Mike's back about to turn to the next floor, sneered. A shot was fired. Boom. The bullet turned a beautiful arc and landed on Ruiwen's shoulder. Ruiwen groaned, blood poured out, and panic began to occur in her heart. She is ever-changing, and she is even proficient in martial arts, but she is just a king of assassins, and it is still not enough to see. If it goes on like this, I will die. The eyes from behind him have already fallen on her body, as if it can freeze her blood. Then, as she turned and rushed to the first floor, she heard gunshots again. Boom. A crisp crash sounded, and the bullet shot at Ruiwen was also intercepted by a bullet. The two collided in midair and landed on the ground. Ruiwen looked at Mike in surprise, pressed the wound on her shoulder and ran out quickly, and whispered, "I'll give it to you." The next second, Kutcher jumped down the stairs, accompanied by several flying bullets. Pfft, puff. The bullet landed on the ground and on the wall, leaving shallow pits. Mike, who had already avoided it, fired the gun in his hand just as Kutcher was about to land on his feet. Ding! There was another crisp sound, and Kutcher blocked the bullet with a bullet, and when he looked at Mike with cold eyes, he suddenly fell into a trance. 2? How come there are 2 Micks? He was sure that he was chasing Mike before, so this Mike in front of him? Mutants are another person in disguise? Thoughts flashed across his mind, but now was obviously not the time to dig deeper. Kutcher looked at Mike, and the two who were less than 2 meters apart looked at each other quietly. Killing intent slowly appeared in the eyes of the two of them. One for the organization's secrets, one for later life. Almost at the same time, the violent beating of heart sounded like the sound of dense war drums, and the two people standing opposite to each other moved. The gun is like a sharp sword in the hands of the two, and the bullet that shoots is like a deadly blade. Mike twitched his fingers quickly, and the bullets in the gun poured out. Bang, bang. The bullets collided from a cramped distance, hugging passionately. The two stepped forward abruptly. While approaching each other, the empty magazine in the gun exited. When they were thrown at each other as a hidden weapon, the other arm flicked, and the other weapon appeared in their hands. At the same time as the shooting, the weapon that was withdrawn from the magazine had been wiped on the waist, and a new magazine was installed. Movements flow, like ballet dancers on stage. Then, the two fought. The muzzle was spewing bullets, and between the blows of the arm, each time it rubbed the bodies of the two and flew by. At this moment, guns and bullets have become an extension of their hands and feet. Tongues of fire flashed continuously between the bodies' confrontation. Suddenly, the two snorted loudly and landed on each other's chest at the same time. The two flew backwards. Mike stretched out his hand to support the ground, and his body that was about to fall flew upside down. At the same time as he lost the gun in his hand, a dagger manifested, like a cold electricity passing through the air and stabbing into the vault. Odd chest. Bah! Kuki fell to the ground, and the gushing blood rubbed a shocking blood stain under his body as he slid backwards. Mike landed and strode towards Kutcher. Cough cough. Kutcher coughed violently, spitting blood from his mouth. The dagger cut through half of his heart, and even the repair medicine in the tissue couldn't save him. Chapter 6? I don't smoke. Ha ha. Kutcher laughed in a low voice, looked at Mike as he approached, and said with difficulty, I wanted you to inherit my position. I am not interested. Any cigarettes? I don't smoke. Kuki was stunned for a moment, then laughed, ha ha. I have it in my pocket. Mike was silent for a while, and Kutcher looked at Mike stubbornly, his eyes gradually becoming pleading. Suddenly, Mike raised his gun, and in Kutcher's stunned eyes, a shot exploded his head. I said, I don't smoke. Mike said lightly, put away the gun, turn around and walk towards the gun he just threw away, just bent down. Boom. In a loud explosion, Kutcher's body was blown to pieces, and blood and stumps flew in the corridor, like the dirt splashed on the wall by a lunatic. Hearing the movement, Ruin, who was outside the door, walked to the door and carefully stuck her head out. Snapped. Putting a hand on her face, she said, don't look at it, it's dirty. Ruin breathed a sigh of relief. Looks like Mike won. Reaching out and pulling out Mike's hand, he said, I haven't seen anything. Looking up, his face turned pale, and he turned to Mike and said, you are so kind. I'm already the father of the child. Ruin was choked. At this moment, Mike lowered his body slightly and whispered something in his ear. Ruin looked at Mike pitifully and pointed to her bleeding shoulder. I'm so pitiful, can't I wait for my injury to heal? Mike smiled slightly. Perhaps, you can wait for me to tell SHIELD, FBI or something about you. Don't think he doesn't know, Ruin's body is much more resilient than ordinary people, and there is also tissue healing fluid. Ruin snorted softly, turned around and left, but after 2 steps, her face changed to Mike's again. Mike breathed a sigh of relief. This time, he is really clear. Coming near the car that was hidden in advance, Mike drove away. Assassin League headquarters. When Sloan received Mike's call, the corners of his mouth couldn't help raising his eyebrows and he hung up the phone. He slowly got up, looked at the killers disguised as workers outside, and laughed in a low voice. Ha 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 ha. Sloan's laughter echoed in the empty office. Suddenly, the laughter stopped abruptly, the joy on Sloan's face disappeared, and he walked out of the office with a heavy and sadness on his face. On the other hand, Raven, who transformed into Mike, bought a plane ticket in Mike's image and left New York after treating his wound. As for Mike, after returning to the Kent farm, he handed over the Kent farm to the person who had contacted in advance, and immediately left the farm with Clark, took the luggage that had been prepared earlier, and left all the way north. 3 years later, in the northern United States, on the edge of a small town on Lake Superior, Mike's Good Tomorrow farm. Mike looked at the endless cornfield and showed a simple smile. Another good harvest this year. Dad. Look. The 3-year-old smiled and ran to Mike. His black hair was slightly curly, and his blue eyes were as pure and flawless as the sky. Clark Kent, son of Mike. Clark put his hand in front of Mike as if offering a treasure. Mike squatted down, rubbed Clark's head with a smile, and said, What is this? Clark sniffed and said, It's my friends, Little Green, Little White, and Little Red. Mike had a bad feeling in his heart. Clark said the same last time, but he threw a 1-meter-long snake and introduced it to Mike. Let me see? Mike said nervously. Clark stepped back and said vigilantly, You won't throw away my friend again. Mike said gently, No. Clark thought for a while and opened his hand. 3 bugs of different colors were trying to move their furry body in Clark's palm. Mike's face changed, he grabbed Clark's hand, shook it hard, and the 3 bugs fell to the ground, then hugged Clark, got up and left. The magic weapon of parents is ruthless. Clark was stunned for a moment, and cried out with a wow. Dad lied to me. Daddy lied to me. Those bugs are poisonous. Don't, Dad lied to me. Insects will bite your fingers. I'm not afraid. I'll make braised pork for you at noon today. Woo-oo, I want to eat 2 bowls, woo-oo. Parents' magic weapons food offensive, successful. Mike's house. After making lunch for Clark, Mike watched the little guy eat happily, smiled slightly, and read the sound system silently. The system interface appears in my mind. Host, Mike Kent. Ability, Memory Fantasy materializes. Current ability level, LV1. Current upgrade progress, 50%. Yes, read that right, the upgrade progress has reached 50%. He found a way to upgrade his abilities. Since the system is called the Super Dad system, it is naturally related to children. When Clark grows, or completes an achievement, Mike's level up bar recharges and Mike's power grows. Even though he has only grown by 30%, the embodied energy in his body is several times more than before. To his helplessness, he can only materialize props and equipment now. Below Mike's profile, belongs to Clark's form. Son, Clark Kent, Kryptonian. August 8, 1982, Clark learned to roll over. October 1, 1982, Clark learned to sit. November 29, 1982, Clark learned to crawl. 1982. The pages that were originally empty were filled with words, all of which were Clark's growth records. Thinking of the bitter history of these 3 years, Mike was in tears. Luckily he didn't lead Clark astray. Although Clark is only 3 years old, the power of the Kryptonian has been initially revealed, and Mike has been teaching Clark to control his own power, and repeatedly told him not to show his difference in front of outsiders. The world looks bright and bright, but the hidden darkness is unimaginable. Mutants who are dissected and studied, tramps used for experiments. Thinking of what he saw in his previous assassin career, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Mike couldn't imagine what would happen if various research institutes found Clark's different. Clark is a good boy and very smart. In his contact with other children, he has recognized his difference from other children, so he listens to Mike's words and never shows his difference in front of others, which also makes Mike feel at ease. Not a lot. Although occasionally willful, but only facing Mike. Mike's solution is simple. Braised pork. There's nothing unhappy that a meal of braised pork can't fix, and if there's any, add a plate of shredded apples and a donut. In 3 years, Mike has learned a lot of dishes, and he is more than enough to deal with Clark. Chapter 7, Clark's Hammer. Mike's house, kitchen. Clark was happy to eat with a plate of braised pork. Seeing Mike looking at him with a smile, he hesitated, found the smallest piece of meat from the bowl, and brought it to Mike's mouth with a fork. Mike shook his head, the chopsticks in his hand moved up and down, and said with a wicked smile, "I'll take a piece myself." Clark pushed the meat in front of Mike and watched Mike pick up the largest piece of meat. His small mouth full of oily stains slowly grew. When Mike was about to feed it into his own mouth, he swallowed and said, "Dad, okay, is it delicious? I haven't eaten yet. I'll try it for you. You are for me." Mike looked like he was thinking, then made a face at Clark and said, "No way." When the words fell, he shoved the meat directly into his mouth, and said with an exaggerated expression, "Wow, delicious." Clark grimaced, feeling as if he was wrong. "Ha ha ha." Seeing Clark's expression, Mike laughed happily. Clark bared his teeth fiercely at Mike, but stuffed the meat from the fork into Mike's mouth, and then smiled at Mike. Mike was stunned for a moment and touched Clark's head, feeling a little warm in his heart. This child is not raised in vain. You eat slowly, Dad goes to wash the dishes. Mike got up, packed up the dishes and walked to the kitchen, but when he reached the door, he turned to Clark and said, "Don't just eat meat." Clark smiled and put a piece of broccoli in his mouth in front of Mike, but when Mike turned around, he quietly spit it into the trash can beside him. "Clark, it's not right to waste food." Clark looked at Mike, his eyes widening. Does his father have eyes behind his head? Obviously he didn't turn his head. How do you know he didn't eat? "Oh, I see." Clark answered loudly, but stuffed a piece of meat into his mouth again, and then with a cautious face, he stuffed the vegetable enemy into his mouth, stuffing his small mouth bulging, chewing it twice, and swallowing. "Go down." Soon, after Clark finished his lunch, he jumped off his chair with his plate and bowl and ran to the kitchen. After a while, Mike finished cleaning up the kitchen, picked up Clark who was helping by the side, and walked upstairs. When he went upstairs, Clark, who had a habit of taking naps, was already nodding his head. Put Clark on the bed and said, "Dad, go out, don't run around when you wake up." "Oh. Daddy will be back soon," Clark said in a daze, and closed his eyes. After Mike covered Clark with a blanket, he turned and left the room. After dinner, Clark usually sleeps for an hour, and he wants to take advantage of this time to prepare a surprise for Clark. Tomorrow, Clark is going to school. He's going to buy something for kindergarten. Locking the door, Mike drove to the town. School bag, paintbrush, eraser. He has already thought about what to buy. Leaving Clark at home alone, he was still a little worried. It only takes 40 minutes to go back and forth. Clark will sleep for about an hour, and there will be an accidental killing of a thief or something like that. Whispering in a low voice, Mike's speed accelerated a lot. Clark's room. After hearing the sound of Mike's car, Clark, who was supposed to be asleep, opened his eyes, rolled happily twice on the bed, got up from the bed, dragged a pile of toys from under his bed, and played by himself. Stand up. Sometimes he didn't want to sleep, so he would pretend to be asleep like the people on the TV, and then after Mike left, he would play quietly in the room by himself. I am the messenger of justice. Let the Red Skull die. Clark whispered with a toy in his left hand and a Captain America toy in the other, and the two collided in midair. Clark couldn't help but get excited when he remembered the story his father told him. Then, click. The Captain America in his hand should not be broken into pieces by that little hand. Clark froze for a moment, his eyes red. This is one of his favorite toys. Woo-oo. Clark sobbed softly, wiped his tears, cleaned up the fragments of Captain America's toy, looked at the Red Skull toy on the ground, pouted, stretched out his fingers and poked lightly, saying, "It's all your fault, it's all your fault. Blame you. Captain America was accidentally pinched to death by me." Throwing away the Red Skull toy, Clark came to the window, wanting to see if Dad came back, but his eyes suddenly widened. He saw a naked man running wildly from a distance, then rushed into the warehouse of his house. Blinking his eyes, Clark thought for a moment and exclaimed, "This is the perverted thief that Dad told me about?" Thief. Be a good person with a sense of justice. Protect your home and family. Thinking of Captain America who was crushed by himself, thinking of the truth that his father told him, Clark's little head came to a conclusion. Thieves are bad people, and bad people are going to be knocked down. He took a deep breath, walked to the edge, stretched out his hand and raised his bed, and after boosting his confidence, he clenched his fists to cheer himself up, opened the door with a straight face, and rushed downstairs. After trotting all the way to the door of the warehouse, Clark took a deep breath, carefully pushed open the door and walked in. He must catch the thief and not let the other party run away. As soon as he entered the warehouse, his keen sense of hearing caught the thief's breathing. He turned his head, picked up a rake and dangled it in his hand. After finding that it was too light to fit in his hand, he threw it away, picked up a hammer that was taller than him, and strode over. "I found you. Damn thief." With Clark's cry, he suddenly appeared in front of the thief. I saw the thief crouching behind the wooden wall where the tools were stacked in the warehouse, as if in pain, his body was shaking slightly, and he was sweating profusely. Logan was startled when he heard the cry, but after looking up at Clark who was dragging a huge hammer and standing in front of him with a straight face, he couldn't help but smile. Such a lovely child. Looking at the other party's smile, Clark was stunned for a moment, and then said angrily, "Are you laughing at me? Perverted thief." With that said, Clark swung the hammer in his hand and smashed it at Logan. Logan was stunned. This kid has a lot of strength, he can swing such a big hammer. But, after all, it is a child. Logan smiled faintly, raised his hand, and grabbed the falling hammer. Even if he's in a bad state now and hasn't gotten used to the Edmund alloy he just injected into his body, but to deal with this kid, it's still. Boom. With a muffled sound, the moment Logan grabbed the hammer, he screamed badly in his heart. He didn't have time to react, so he stared at his round eyes and was hammered out by a hammer. Boom. He hung like a painting on the wall. Logan looked at Clark in shock, and couldn't help but complain, "Fake. This is a monster in a child's coat." Chapter 8? Are you happy? Clark dragged the hammer and looked at Logan angrily, with a white and tender face like a fleshy bun, which looked very cute. Logan swallowed, and couldn't help but smile after being surprised. This kid is a mutant. Ordinary children would never be able to pick up this hammer. His eyes softened involuntarily, and a smile appeared on his face. Clark stepped back vigilantly and said, "Perverted thief. What do you want? Why are you looking at me like that? Are there any bad thoughts?" Logan's face stiffened and he said, "I'm not a pervert." Clark raised the hammer in his hand, glared at Logan, and said, "My dad said, don't wear clothes, show hair in front of children. People with big caterpillars are perverts." The corners of his mouth twitched, and Logan spit out, "What did your father teach you? He's sick. Don't speak ill of my father. You perverted thief." Clark held the hammer and rushed towards Logan again with his short legs. "Ah!" Clark shouted, "the milk is fierce." Logan looked at Clark amusingly, turned around to dodge, looked at the big hole in the wall, and the corners of his mouth twitched wildly. "Pooh!" Clark spat out the ash in his mouth and shouted to Logan, "Don't hide if you can." "Ha ha!" Logan laughed out loud at Clark's appearance. At this moment, Mike, who came home, heard the movement of the warehouse, pushed open the door and walked in, just to see a naked man smiling at his son. "Hold the grass! Crazy pervert!" Anger burned in Mike's heart, and the next second his heart beat violently. When the man heard the movement and turned around quickly, a flying kick just landed on the opponent's chest and kicked him out. Logan fell to the ground, grinning, his hands clenched, Edmund's claws almost out of control. Clark held the hammer and ran over with e. Mike strode forward, took Clark in his arms, took Clark's hammer, and with a wave of the hammer in his hand pressed it on the chest of the man who wanted to get up. Logan paused and looked at Mike with a helpless face. "Man, believe me, this is not what you think. I am not a bad person." Mike looked at the other party's face, and there was a hint of doubt in his eyes, and then said, "Name?" Logan said lightly, "Logan." "Definitely Wolverine." Mike groaned and said, "It seems that you have encountered some bad things." Logan smiled bitterly, "It's very bad." "Oh shit." Thinking of what he had experienced during this time, Logan couldn't help but scolded in a low voice. Mike picked up the hammer and put it aside, and said, "Get up." Clark whispered to Mike, "Dad, he's not a thief?" Mike patted Clark's head and smiled, "It shouldn't be a thief." Hearing this, Logan nodded, "How could he be a thief? It's a pervert at most." The smile on Logan's face just now froze. "Ha ha!" Mike laughed happily. Putting Clark on the ground, Mike took out a piece of change in his pocket, walked up to Logan, whistled at Logan, and put it in Logan's hand when he was puzzled. Holding Clark's hand, he walked outside the warehouse and said, "If you don't mind, I have some old clothes that I can lend you to wear." Logan held a piece of money and stood there blankly, a little moved but also a little puzzled. He met nice people, but why give him money? Logan looked down at himself, and remembered Mike's whistle. As if struck by lightning, the corners of his mouth twitched wildly, and shouted loudly, "Fake! You're the stripper!" "Ha ha!" Mike's laughter came from outside. Logan's face was ugly, but he laughed softly, walked to the door of the warehouse, and was about to stride out. His crotch was cold, but he stepped back and shouted to Mike, "Dude, get me a note first." Pants. After half an hour, Logan took a shower, changed into Mike's clothes, and walked out of the bathroom. "Yo, very spirited." Mike smiled at Logan, Clark nodded like a little adult, and then said a little tangled, "Dad, is he still a pervert with clothes on?" Logan made a vicious look at Clark's grin, hugged Clark, and said, "If you talk nonsense, I'll eat you." Clark clenched his fists and said, "I'm not afraid." "What?" Logan made a vicious cry. "The wolf howls." Clark laughed instead. "Clark, Uncle Logan." Clark responded and said, "Uncle." Logan grinned, kissed Clark's little face, and said, "This is the happiest thing I've encountered in the past few days. There will be more fun things to do in a while." Mike tapped on the table. Logan's eyes lit up, and there was some expectation in his heart. After an hour, Logan squatted outside Mike's warehouse expressionlessly, holding tools to mend the hole Clark made. After all, his expectations were wrong. I was pitted by Mike, it must be. With a sigh, he squinted at Clark, who was squatting beside him, and said gently, "Are you going to help me, boy?" Still Clark is loving. Clark shook his head and said, "My dad asked me to see the consequences of impulse." "Isn't that what you knocked on?" Logan frowned. Clark embarrassedly tapped the ground under his feet and said, "Yeah, that's why my father let me see the troubles caused by impulsive actions, and let me think carefully before doing things in the future." Logan was stunned, touched Clark's head, and said, "You have a good father. What else did your father say?" Clark thought for a while and said, "He said let me ask you if you are happy." "I'm happy for his grandma's legs." Logan cursed in his heart, and had the urge to give Mike a few claws with his claws. He turned to Clark and said, "I take back what I just said, your father is an asshole. Take a deep breath. Fake." With a low curse, Logan continued to build the wall. In the evening, when Logan repaired the wall and returned to Mike's house with tools, after seeing the dishes on the table, he suddenly felt that the wall was not repaired in vain this afternoon. "It looks very tasty." Logan sat down while praising. "My dad's cooking must be delicious." Clark did not hesitate to praise himself, imitating the rooster on the farm, and raised his chin proudly. Mike laughed, patted Clark's head lightly, and said, "Eat." After a while, full of food and wine, Logan picked his teeth, glanced at Clark, and said, "Is your child a mutant?" "No, he's just a little bit stronger," Mike said vaguely. Logan didn't ask any further, but instead asked, "What about you?" "I'm not." "You." Logan. Interrupting the other party's words, Mike smiled, "Can I ask you what trouble you are in?" Logan was silent for a while, remembering his own experience, opened his mouth but couldn't say it, then shrugged and said, "I understand." Chapter 9? Home. Boom. The two only met today, and even if they feel that the other person is a good person and they are very compatible, there are still some things that they can't say. For a while, the restaurant fell into silence. Clark looked at the two curiously, sipped his juice, and said, "Dad, which room is Uncle Logan sleeping in tonight?" "He'll be gone in a while." Mike turned his head to look at Logan and said with a smile, "Right, Logan?" Logan's eyes dimmed, then he laughed frankly, scratched Clark's nose, and said, "Yes, I still have things to do, a lot of things." Looking at Logan, Mike sighed in his heart. Logan is a nice guy and a nice friend, but he's in too much trouble right now. Through Logan's Luoban incident, Mike guessed that Logan should have been injected with Edmonalloy now, escaped from Stryker's base, and is now being hunted by Stryker's people. If it wasn't for Clark, he wouldn't mind making Logan as a friend, and ran away with him to help deal with Stryker. But now, he's a father first and foremost for Clark. An hour later, Logan stood outside the door, saying goodbye to Mike and his son. Logan looked at the father and son in front of him, and his cold heart was warmed a lot by the two. If it weren't for Mike, he would still be hungry and PG naked. He understands that he is in trouble now, and also understands that staying here will bring trouble to the father and son. He can ask for more. Besides, he is not qualified, and the other party is not able to provide him with more help. Thinking of this, Logan couldn't help but said gratefully, "Man, thank you." Mike nodded, patted Logan's shoulder, and said, "Take care, Logan. When you solve the trouble, you can come as a guest at any time." Logan grinned, nodded, bent over and squeezed Clark's face, and said, "Goodbye, little man." Clark waved his hand obediently and said, "Goodbye, Uncle Logan." Logan smiled and turned away. 1 step, 2 steps. Logan walked slowly into the darkness like a lone wolf. "Dad, Uncle Logan looks lonely, what's the loneliness?" "Dad." Clark raised his head. Mike said faintly, "Lonely. Ah, I just wanted to say that. Little boy, what do you know?" Mike picked up Clark and said with a smile, "Let's go, it's time for you to sleep." But in the next second, his eyes changed slightly, and he rolled back with Clark without hesitation. Boom! A bullet pierced where he had just stood, leaving a puddle of splashing dirt in the ground. Boom, boom. Mike's heart throbbed violently. Assassin time is on. Mike rushed down the house not far behind with Clark in his arms, and the bullets fell behind Mike one by one, leaving craters one by one. Mike's heart was cold, and killing intent boiled in his heart. The bullet just now was aimed at Clark. This bastard. While dodging the attack, Mike looked back at the direction the bullet came from, looking for the opponent's location. Found it. It's him? Mike was a little surprised. He rushed forward with Clark, rushed into the room, kicked the door with his foot, rolled on the ground with Clark, and hid behind the wall. PFFT, puff. In a series of soft noises, holes appeared in the door. Mike bent over, carried Clark to the living room, and hid behind the wall in the shooting blind spot. Dad! Clark let out a soft cry. His blue eyes were full of doubts, but he was not afraid. Mike hugged Clark and said in as gentle a tone as possible, "Don't be afraid." Clark nodded and put his head on Mark's chest. Mike took a deep breath, his beating heart slowly calmed down, but his eyes became colder and colder. The sniper is Asian and is Agent 0. It's Stryker's subordinate. Ems. Mike snorted softly. He clearly remembered that in the original plot, Logan was found by Stryker's people the next morning. How did he get to him and found it that night? Moreover, your target is Logan. Go kill Logan. Why are you making trouble for our father and son? Do you just want to find a scapegoat for Logan? Or just do it casually? Thinking of this, Mike couldn't help but scolded. Fuck. Dad, what the fuck? Ah, that's a plant. Mike babbled casually. Just then, he suddenly heard the sound of the helicopter's propeller. Shouldn't. Mike shrank his eyes and ran to the window with Clark in his arms. At the same time, a card appeared in his hand. When he jumped out of the window with Clark in his arms, the card in his hand disappeared, and a stopwatch appeared in his hand. The next second, 2 missiles were fired from the helicopter and landed on their home. Boom, boom. The flames swept around with a shock wave, roaring and destroying everything. At this moment, Mike pressed the stopwatch in his hand. In an instant, he and Clark were plated with a layer of gold, and they stopped in the air contrary to common sense. A stopwatch, an item in League of Legends, can be immune to damage for 2.5 seconds, but cannot move or attack. Although the life-saving props embodied by Mike have great limitations, at some point, it is definitely a good thing for life-saving. Flames and shock waves swept away from their location with fragments of the house, engulfing the place where the two were. In the distance, when Zero, who was holding the sniper rifle, saw this scene, his long and thin lips twitched slightly. Although the man could dodge his shots one after another, which he did not expect, but under such an attack, the opponent would never survive. In the end, it's just 2 ordinary people. Ling murmured, pressed the communicator beside his ear, and said, "Attention, the mad dog is coming back." Of course he already knew that Logan wasn't at Mike's house, but he didn't want to go after him. As long as this place is blasted away, Logan, who has not gone far, will definitely return to avenge the father and son. As a former teammate, he still knows each other very well. Oh, idiot! The agent murmured disdainfully. On the other side, Logan, who had not gone far, hurriedly turned his head to look after hearing the explosion. The soaring flames were brought into his eyes, making his whole body fall into an ice cellar, but his eyes seemed to be on fire. He seemed to see the scene where the father and son were swallowed by flames and torn apart in the explosion. Ah! I'm going to kill you. With a roar, Logan's eyes were red, like a lunatic, he turned and rushed back. At the same time, after holding Clark to avoid the impact with the stopwatch, Mike rushed out of the fire with Clark and came to the basement of their house. "Clark, you are here waiting for Dad." Mike spoke in a still gentle voice. "Dad." Clark grabbed Mike's charred sleeve. Mike turned around, turned his head and touched Clark's head, and said, "Clark, You have to remember, friends come with good wine, and jackals come with shotguns. Looking at his father, Clark felt that Mike was exuding a sharp aura he had never seen before. But it is undeniable that looking at such a father, he felt as if he was protected by a barrier called security, and he felt extremely at ease. Chapter 10, Scatter It, Zero Sakura. Logan stood quietly in front of the burning ruins, seemingly unaware of the surrounding enemies. Several armored vehicles, 2 combat helicopters. Only under the protection of the armor of these combat vehicles can they dare to face Wolverine, and their fear cannot be so naked in front of Logan's eyes. Bass. Edmund's sharp blade rubbed Logan's bones and stretched out from his fingers, glittering coldly in the moonlight. Logan turned around slowly, his calm face gradually twisted, and a long suppressed roar rushed out from the depths of his throat. Die! He fell low, like a wild beast, rushing towards the enemy. Fire! Blast me his head! Agent Zero sneered, looking at the upcoming battle with his arms crossed. The drama of the trapped beast still fighting is his favorite show. Da. Bullets hit Logan like a torrential rain. Logan put his claws in front of his face and moved quickly, avoiding the bullet as much as possible, but he couldn't dodge it, so he let the bullet hit him. For a time, blood splattered, and Logan's body was torn open one by one. But Logan didn't seem to feel the pain, instead he grinned, revealing a cold smile. In the next second, he had already rushed within a few meters of the armored car, and jumped to an armored car. The Edmund's blade seemed to pierce a piece of paper, penetrated the armored car, and shredded the armor of the armored car. Ah! Logan sneered. Amid the screams of the soldier, he tore the other's body with one claw. With a wave of his hand, he cut off the legs of the other soldier who had been standing on the armored vehicle and attacked him with machine guns. When falling, a paw pierced the opponent's head. Give him a ruthless hit and see how resistant he is. Following Agent Zero's orders, a missile was launched from the helicopter and flew towards the specialist vehicle below. Logan's face changed, and he jumped out of the armored car. Boom! In the flames, the armored vehicle was scrapped in an instant, and the turbulent impact knocked Logan out. Logan rolled around on the ground, got up from the ground, and ripped off an iron plate from his chest. Pooh! Spitting out a mouthful of saliva, Logan looked at the remaining armored vehicles and the helicopter in midair, and made a throat-slashing motion at Agent Zero. Agent Zero looked at Logan, his eyes jumped slightly, and said, "Keep your distance, don't let him get close, a bunch of idiots." The remaining 3 armor-piercing vehicles moved in an instant, and they quickly turned around Logan. When Logan rushed towards one of them, the other 2 kept firing at Logan, and when Logan changed when the target was reached, the other 2 turned around and kept firing at Logan. Logan suffers from no means of long-range attack, and can only be exhausted in the hail of bullets. For a time, Logan became a living target. Logan roared, but he could only dodge the bullets as much as possible, looking for opportunities with difficulty. Beasts are beasts, they only use their claws, hee hee. Agent Zero sneered and looked at Logan below, feeling relieved. Just as the 2 sides were at a stalemate, Mike, who was hiding in the distance, looked coldly at the armored vehicles and combat helicopters in the distance, with a gloomy smile on the corner of his mouth. "Want to kill us? Blow up our home?" With a low voice, a card appeared at his fingertips. "It would be great if we could implement modern weapons. If anyone doesn't like it, throw him a little boy, a big Ivan or something." Mike muttered, a little regretful in his heart. His eyes narrowed, and his attention was focused on the card between his fingers. The card has the image of a knife on it, and the information about the knife on the back. Name, Thousand Sakura. Item Introduction: This is a Zanpakuto, which has the same lethal power to the soul. When the liberation language is uttered, it will exert its real power. Liberation language, first solution, scatter it, Senbon Sakura. Note: when Senbon Sakura's blade turns into cherry blossoms and dances, it is a beautiful scene, and it is also your death. With a flick of his finger, the card disappeared between his fingers. Instead, A beautiful knife appeared out of thin air from where the car disappeared. Grabbing Kyanban Sakura, Mike said in a low voice, "If only I could explain it." With his current ability, due to the lack of materialization power, he can only materialize the Zanpakuto of the first solution, and after the first solution, the realization time of the Zanpakuto will be greatly reduced. Now, the existence time is 2 minutes, which is enough to deal with the battle. Besides, he has other cards. For the past 3 years, he has been making manifested cards in his spare time. So far, he has been lazy, and there will be more and more in the future. Holding the Zanpakuto upside down, Mike walked to the battlefield. That is, Agent Zero, who had been observing the battlefield, immediately saw Mike, the man who should have died, and was shocked. Then, before he could react, he saw a picture that made him take a deep breath. Mike held the Zanpakuto and slowly walked towards the battlefield. "Let's scatter, Senbon Sakura." Along with whispering, the Zanpakuto in the hands of Yukinshu.com was first understood. Senhan's blade shattered quietly in the moonlight, and fluttered in the moonlight like petals fluttering in the wind. Ah! Looking at the armored vehicle that was still flying a kite, Mike twitched the corner of his mouth and waved his hand holding the handle of the knife lightly. The flying petals felt to an armored vehicle like a dancing streamer. Pieces of tiny blades followed Mike's thoughts, frantically cutting the armored car, leaving scars one after another. When passing by, the expert car had been torn apart, and the 2 soldiers inside still had that amazing look in their eyes. When they were crimson, the seemingly weak petals had torn their throats and floated towards the next armored vehicle. "A mutant? What ability is this?" Agent Zero whispered, but his heart suddenly contracted. I saw Mike on the ground, looking up at him, his eyes indifferent, as if looking at a corpse. He was outraged. With a flip of his palm, the sniper rifle in his hand appeared in his hand, then aimed at Mike, and pulled the trigger without hesitation. But the moment he pulled the trigger, Mike, who had been maintaining the assassin's time, had already dodged. At the same time, with a wave of the hilt in his hand, the blade transformed by Kyanban Sakura swept toward another expert car again. With angry eyes, the armored car was torn apart. For a time, Rogan's pressure was greatly reduced. He glanced at Mike in surprise, nodded to him, and rushed towards the bullet of the last expert car. Amidst the screams of the soldiers, "Shred it!" With an ugly face, Agent Zero said in a low voice, "Pull up and smash them to pieces." Without waiting for the words to fall, he saw Mike wave the bladeless hilt in his hand at him, his eyes widened, and he screamed, "Go up! Avoid! Hi. This is Novel Admire. Thanks for the visit. Come back again for more novels.